So in media, a neighbor's choice. I'm your host, your neighbor, David Gernowski. So glad to have this time with you. Here again, across the Sunshine State, we're coming to you live on FM and AM. And we're going to unpack the news again, as we always do, neighbor to neighbor. We're not going to rely on tribalism and groupthink here. We're going to get to the bottom of the problems. That is, our addiction to politics. Politics cannot save us. As the old joke says, politics means many, poly means many, ticks, which means blood-sucking creatures. And that's what we have with politics. We got many blood-sucking creatures, and then the form of regulations and division and fake news. It's very uncomfortable, but it's okay because we're going to navigate through this swamp together and work towards positive solutions that we can work on ourselves. And so joining me to unpack some of the culture problems that we have today is a guest of the program we've had on before. He is a retired entrepreneur, someone who has worked in a lot of different industries, and he has a great wisdom. He joins us from Michigan now. Brad Smith. How you doing, Brad?
I'm doing great, David. How are you doing?
Doing well. We had you on at the beginning when this melee was going on with the early lockdown politics, and man, it feels like the longest year ever in some ways, huh?
Yeah, it sure does. I know the last time I was talking about being worried about mob violence because of what I'd seen down in Panama. Sadly, I wasn't wrong.
Yeah, you were a little too prescient on that.
Yeah, I see today in the news do you see the woman in Ohio that was at the football game?
I don't think I saw that. What was the story?
She got tased and arrested for not having her mask on.
Oh, my goodness.
There was probably 30 people at the game. Her and her family weren't near anybody. And they came and just manhandled her, tased her, and hauled her off.
Wow.
It was such an incredible story to me just because that's what we're up against, that type of mentality that it's okay to harm people who are essentially minding their own business.
Right.
That's the monopoly of the use of force is such a dangerous thing to hand over to any government.
Yeah, you have to have a moral foundation if you're going to have force. It needs to be grounded in skin in the game. It needs to be based on real violence that you're stopping. You know, fraud, theft, burglary, harming the young, assault, violence. Those are things that we should have laws on the books to defend our life and our liberty, our children, our property. Those are basic, essential, common sense things we all agree upon. And then the moment we make the rule of law become something that can go beyond that limited scope, it turns into madness. Because, like you said, if once you violate that principle, you say, well, we're going to be not using violence except for this nonviolent act or this nonviolent choice or this victimless behavior. Once you make an excuse morally for one, to me, you lose the entire argument, and it's just a matter of time before law becomes a very arbitrary bludgeon. You know what I mean?
It's really easy to slip into the mindset of, well, this is an emergency, so we should throw out all of our morals, everything we've underpinned our society on. It's an emergency. Well, who declares an emergency? Everybody decides that something is an emergency. The war on drugs, well, that's an emergency. So then we violate our own principles. Well, the same thing's happening with the lockdowns. We've decided that it's such an emergency we can just throw everything out the window. Doesn't matter because this is different. But it's not different. We have crises throughout time, and that's what having a constitution and our rights help guide us through. You come out of it whole because you don't give up your principles. Mm-hmm. But how do you come out of a situation like this whole if you just start the entire situation by saying, well, we're just going to give up everything we believe in to begin with? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it is a catch-22 because it could be a dangerous situation. Maybe it is unprecedented. But again, that's all the more reason to not give up your rights in the middle of an emergency.
Right.
You don't hand over even more power to people who we know abuse power in the middle of an emergency. Right. That's not a good time or place to even try to think about redoing your entire society. And then we have, of course, the mob riots going on, and yet their mindset towards them is completely different. Somehow they go about their business, and that's not spreading the virus. That's okay. So then again, what's it show you? It shows you that your rulers have decided to make decisions along unprincipled lines and just use politics in place for principles. It's okay when we do it, but not when they do it. Violence is a fine alternative to use against this poor woman sitting in the crowd, or not even in a crowd, with her family, minding her own business. It's okay to use violence because we had a crack epidemic, but look at what we're doing now. We're realizing that the war on drugs is a failure, and what we did was harm the lives of millions of people.
And instead of
and that falls back to the idea that we just ignore our own principles.
And Brad, instead of fixing the underlying bad laws, all we do is just finger point about race and stuff. You know what I mean? So I looked at that Breonna Taylor situation, and people said, the grand jury came out and said they could not find, under the law, a case to be made for convicting the officers of murder. But, why can't we put the focus on get rid of the no-knock raids and let's curtail this extreme drug war so that these incidents can't occur? Instead, the focus is all about, well, this is about race and we got to fight about race. And to me, it's just such a devious situation because whenever we're fighting about race, the bad, wicked laws stay on the books and people of all backgrounds get hurt in the process,
Well, absolutely. Right now, it's pretty clear that it's being used as a scapegoat. You can take the term systemic racism. It's actually systemic failure. We have failed along racial lines. It's definitely a harder life to live in this country if you're born black. But that's a failure. You don't blame that on some three-toothed hillbilly in Arkansas who has nothing to do with how these cities are run, the laws that are on the books. All of the things that harm these people are a failure of both parties.
Yeah.
Both parties exported jobs. That hurts. Both parties have persecuted the war on drugs. You can take all of these problems, and if you blame racism, you're just ignoring everything else. It's a red herring, I suppose, is another way of putting it. Mm-hmm. You don't have to admit you failed if you can blame some hillbilly and say, oh, it's his fault because he's making life worse. Right. But yet he has nothing to do with how any of these people live or what harms them in their societies. Right. He's just a scapegoat, and and racism, although it exists and it's a problem, it's not the problem that's causing what they call systemic racism. Mm-hmm. Systemic racism is just a failure, but the left uses linguistic tricks to make it appear to be racism and not just a failure. Public schools, we know they're failing, and that definitely plays a role in systemic racism, as they call it. If people come out of these schools and they're not educated, that puts them on a life that's not on par with the rest of us. But who's responsible for that? Are there racists running all of these inner city schools? Not at all. They're completely run by Democrats. They're completely run by people who want to do good. The welfare system, it's a systemic failure, but it leads to what they call systemic racism. But it's a great way that they don't have to admit their failure. They can blame it on racism, and then we never have to fix these laws. We don't have to fix the war on drugs. We don't have to fix our lousy education. We don't have to take on the teachers' unions who protect lousy teachers, who fight against choice in schools. You can't have good schools because you have unions, but then they blame it on racism. So yeah, it's a scapegoat. It's a red herring. It's a way of ignoring our actual problems.
Yeah, I'm thinking of the issue of the lethality of COVID-19 for minority communities as well. You know, they used that. There was a higher percentage of minority communities that were having horrible situations with this virus, and they said because there's a comorbidity increase, and they said therefore that means that the virus is a racist situation, and it's like, well, no, it's because our government system has made the food pyramid stacked in a way that promotes inflammatory high sugar consumption, which is correlated with these comorbidities, And so any community is going to have an increase in comorbidities, particularly if they are stuck in a underprivileged community that has poverty, because you're not going to be able to afford the high quality whole foods. You're going to have to stick to the bread and the foods that are high in sugar, carbohydrates, and polyunsaturated fatty acids, which are all inflammatory correlations with these comorbidities, you see. But you can't have a conversation about the sacred food pyramid. You can't have a conversation about curtailing government's involvement in rigging nutrition science. No. We have to shake the shiny toy and say, hey, look, let's go fight about racism instead of healing people. And so I think in some ways, Brad, this desire to make everything about race rather than about stopping the sacrificial incursions into our lives that government is doing is de facto the most racist thing you could imagine, because it keeps pulverizing people unnecessarily by deflecting people's attention away from these bad laws and towards never-ending fights about who's the most victimized, right?
Absolutely. And I could get into the food pyramid on. You take they fought for years to get something as simple as pop, soda, whatever you call it in your state, off of the food stamp list. They can't even do that. And I don't think anybody agrees that you should be drinking as much pop as you want, but you can buy all of it you want with food stamps. Yeah. Then we go to a system like WIC, which is slightly better because it's supposed to be a coupon for specific food, milk, cheese, etc. But yet, as a store owner, we saw that most people were going for the least healthy foods, even on the WIC list. Your cereals, your sugar drinks, they're supposed to be fruit, but there's almost no fruit in them. That's just pretty much sugared water. And so even your WIC, which is supposed to be healthy food, is still reliant on this scam of a food pyramid. There's not meat on there. But there's a lot of junk on there. So our entire aid for poor people really pushes them towards some of the most unhealthy food that there is.
And nobody's talking about that.
What can you do about it?
I haven't heard.
We have to educate people.
But Brad,
that's all we can do.
Brad, I haven't heard Dr. Fauci talk about this. I haven't heard anybody who says that they are for, the compassionate view. I haven't heard any of them say a word about this. I haven't heard any politician on any level of government get out there and say, hey, you know what? Maybe we need to lower our carbohydrates. Maybe we need to lower our sugar intake. Maybe we need to lower our industrial oil intake and go back to a more simple, lower sugar, lower carbohydrate, holistic diet. Nobody says that. And you got to wonder, if you guys really care about stopping these fatalities from this virus, why can't you just level with people? If you really care about people, dig deep inside. And maybe some of them are ignorant, but some of them could do the research. It just takes a few papers to read to understand how wrong the food pyramid has been. But again, Brad, they'd rather, it seems like, sacrifice people rather than repent of their false god, the state, you know? Everything has to be done to protect
Definitely. Yeah. I think the closest that Fossey came was saying that he took vitamin D.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's one acknowledgement that you can fight the virus by having a healthier immune system.
But not if you're eating all the
but
soda
of course,
pop.
They're not going to talk about food.
Not if you're eating all the sugar. The vitamin D is going to have a hard time overcoming the comorbidities then. Let's take a quick break. You're listening to A Neighbor's Choice. I'm David Gronowski here with my friend Brad Smith, who joins us from Michigan, talking about the news, talking about the culture, the big picture view. That's what we're all about on this program, not the tit for tat, not the scapegoat ping pong. That's for all the parrot media. There's 10,000 options for that. Back in just a moment. David Gronowski here. Let me tell you about a man named Gabriel. Every day, Gabriel puts on his boots and drives across America to make sure our store shelves stay stocked with the food people count on. See, Gabriel served our country overseas. He knows that America stands for freedom, quality, and caring for others the way we would like to be treated. That's why when Gabriel saw food shelves getting low during the pandemic, he hit the road as a driver with Oakley Transport. In the land of the free, where no one should go hungry, we need heroes like Gabriel to help keep America fed. CDLA driving professionals. Join Oakley Transport today. Keep America fed. Visit oakleytransport.com or call them today at 1-877-8-TANKER. That's 1-877-8-TANKER.
This portion of the upcoming amazing broadcast is brought to you by the law firm of Catania & Catania, award-winning personal injury, auto, and motorcycle accident attorneys, serving Tampa Bay families for over 28 years.
Not ready to go to your favorite seafood restaurant? Get the highest quality fish for less, delivered straight to your door by Fast Fresh Seafood. Order our fresh hot snapper, grouper, mahi, and more. They're boneless, skinless, flash frozen the same day, and individually vacuum wrapped. Pick the size filet you want, the amount you want, and checkout's easy at fastfreshseafood.com. The best thing, every fish is on sale. Fastfreshseafood.com. Caught fresh for you, delivered straight to you. Stay home and stay safe.
Need a trusted hand sanitizer made in the USA? Physicians Group Hand Sanitizer reduces bacteria that can cause disease. Our liquid sanitizer is made of 75% ethanol alcohol. Our gel sanitizer is 70%. Neither requires soap or water. Simply cover all surfaces of your hands, then rub them together until dry. Our hand sanitizer comes in 2 to 16-ounce bottles and gallon jugs. Order now at easyhandsanitizer.com and receive 10% off all orders over $100. That's easyhandsanitizer.com.
Our monetary system is failing. Negative interest rates, growing debt, highly speculative market, and the dollar is being devalued by the Fed. Investing your wealth has never been more challenging. Who wants to earn just 1% interest annually in a savings account? There is another option. Monetary metals. They pay interest on gold in gold, with no storage costs ever. Visit interestongold.com/David. That's interestongold.com/David.
This portion of the upcoming amazing broadcast is brought to you by the law firm of Catania & Catania, award-winning personal injury, auto, and motorcycle accident attorneys, serving Tampa Bay families for over 28 years.
So our nation is going through a unique time right now where we're starting to realize that the gods, the false gods of our politics, they're not standing up to the weight of all the pressures that they've been pretending to hold on their shoulders. And so we're in this weird moment. I call it the twilight of the gods, the twilight of the American gods, where all these sacred cows about what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to go to government school. We're supposed to do what the government says about nutrition. We're supposed to do what the government says about foreign policy. We're supposed to do what the government says about politically correct speech codes. We're supposed to do all this stuff and we'll be okay. And we've done it and done it and done it, and it's failed, and now we're in the midst of a big moment in our lives. It's pretty incredible. It's exciting because there's an opportunity for amazing progress, but it's also a time fraught with danger because there's an opportunity for a lot of bad stuff to happen. I'm here with Brad Smith, who joins us from Michigan. So, Brad, you've talked about this too, that these wannabe gods of politics, they're having a reckoning right now, and they're pulling out all the stops to distract us from the fact that, hey, maybe the problem, as Reagan said, government is the problem. But it's not enough just to say it like Reagan did. You got to dramatically cut government in a serious way and dramatically rethink our right to use coercion to have our way, don't we?
Yeah, it's a never-ending. It's almost a catch-22. People are probably, in a way, not quite capable of ruling their own lives, but to put people in charge who are equally not capable of ruling, and then handing them monopoly on power, is not the answer. You have to give people the information so that they're more capable of taking care of themselves. Knowledge is power. Instead, we hand power over to people who aren't necessarily knowledgeable. We think they are. We treat them as if they're relying on experts, but we realize they're not. They're still people. They're greedy. They lie. They cheat. They're human beings. And all you've done by handing them more power is amplifying the problems that they can create. You can say that as an individual, we need the police. We need security. We need safety. We need somebody that will protect our rights. But by handing government, this false idol, this false god, more and more power, all we're doing is allowing them to take those same aspects of human nature to a whole other level. Given human beings, given our limited ability without government to create things, probably wouldn't have come up with a nuclear weapon and put the entire world at risk. So although government might solve some problems, the danger of it creating more problems is just far too severe to ignore. The idea that, government's what we do as a people. We do this together. Yes, but people are people. The good and the bad can be amplified by government. And yet people seem to ignore the bad and think, only good is going to come from growing the government because it's what we do together. We as a people come up with this greater way of living by giving people this power.
Yeah, and it's a kind of mass...
It's a catch-22 because...
It's a mass delusion too, Brad, because growing government to solve our problems really just means growing the entrenchment of coercion as the glue that will bind us together. It's a belief in sacrifice. But Jesus said God desires mercy, not sacrifice. And we can't have mercy via sacrifice. That's what folks think. Give government the power and they'll give mercy via their sacrificial violence. And it just doesn't work.
Right.
But we're going to have a quick news break and we'll pick this conversation up with Brad Smith. Stay tuned.
Ronald Reagan would turn over in his grave if he saw what's going on today.
Crazy things are happening.
You cannot be afraid. You've got to stand up for what you believe is right.
But one thing is for sure.
You can't trust anybody.
For talk, news, and information, you can count on us.
Enough is enough. I almost blew a gasket.
Good for the country.
I know what I'm talking about. A lot of wackos out there.
Your connection to talk about it. The all-new News Talk 1040. WHP.
Kentucky's governor calling on the state attorney general to release the grand jury findings in the Breonna Taylor case. The EMT died in March when 3 officers were executing a warrant at her apartment while she was sleeping. The grand jury indicted one officer for wanton endangerment for firing bullets that entered nearby apartments, but no one was charged in Taylor's death. That led to protests last night and violence with 2 police officers shot. Before leaving for a rally in North Carolina, President Trump was asked what message he had for Breonna's family.
I think it's a sad thing, and I give my regards to the family of Breonna. I also I think it's so sad what's happening with everything about that case, including law enforcement. So many people suffering.
Police say the officers shot last night are recovering and the suspect is in custody. The pandemic continuing to affect Americans from their health to jobs. 870,000 Americans filing for first-time unemployment benefits last week. Michelle Franzen, ABC News.
Welcome back to A Neighbor's Choice. I'm David Granosky, your host here. Number to call if you want to call in to the show is 727-587-1040. That's 727-587-1040. And our email, you can always reach us at, is hello@aneighborschoice.com. That's hello@aneighborschoice.com. I'm joined with Brad Smith, who joins me from Michigan. And we're reflecting on some of the different issues going on in the news today from a big picture view, looking at kind of how government has acted like a religion for so long and taking over so many aspects of our lives. Brad, I think a good illustration of this was the recent passing of, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And there was a video that was online today of Trump going to see the casket of Ginsburg, and there was a loud hissing and crying. It was a weird noise they were making, hissing and crying at the sound at the arrival of Donald Trump and his wife. And I thought to myself, it's just such a bizarre moment because he's trying to pay respects to a human being. Of course, they won't accept his sacrifice. It reminds me of those gods in mythology where they say, I don't accept that sacrifice. You need to do another sacrifice or a different and it reminded me of that, well, you're unholy, you're a heretic, you can't have a human moment, you're not able to be human, and this vilification of those that we disagree with was on display in that scene because a lot of folks have held up Ginsburg as an icon, as a kind of demigod for their view of the all-powerful state. And now she's gone. And that's sad. But instead of having it as a moment for human reflection, it becomes a moment to, oh my goodness, there's Trump. He's a heretic. Hiss, boo, scream, get out of our temple. This is our holy temple.
Yeah. Yeah, he's from the wrong temple. Although but again, see, they think that they can fix everything by just changing the head of the high priest or the high priestess. Somehow that's going to change everything. If we get rid of the orange man, well, then we can just fix everything. If we just hand power to the right people, if we give them the power to abuse us, they won't. They'll somehow have a softer hand or a more gentle hand as they're abusing their authority. Mm-hmm. But there's no evidence that changing the president or even changing a Supreme Court leader is going to change that fundamental way in which government treats its people. They still have that power and that ability to abuse. And the larger and larger we grow the government, that grows with it. If you take COVID, look at the over-response to it, in my opinion. It's my opinion that we did more harm by shutting down the economy than we did good. How many millions of lives will be ruined by lost jobs, so we give them the power, but it's too much for any one person. I think as Lord Acton said, power corrupts, essentially. And yet we assume that Biden will fix things, or the other team assumes Trump can fix things. But government isn't the answer. It just creates a whole other set of problems. Now, again, we come back to the COVID response. Around here, I mean, I don't know. Maybe in New York City, a lockdown was the right thing to do. But again, when you get into big government, you end up with a one-size-fits-all solution. Detroit has one issue. Up here in northern Michigan, we don't have that issue. But yet, because power is centralized, they're going to make a rule that applies that might help one group and harms way more people. The mentality that government's there to fix all of your problems just falls flat, because the only power that they have is that power of force, which they'll use arbitrarily. Because they're centralized, there is no other way. It's not possible for them to set up a rule that's fair everywhere. So by default, people are abused by these rules. You can't tell me that my local economy, as being crushed by the shutdown, didn't hurt more people than good. Now, you might make that argument in Detroit, but you're sure not going to make it in northern Michigan, where the virus is practically non-existent. But we get hurt because we rely on the centralization of power. When it comes to the U.S., look at all of the problems that we have that stem from Washington's inability to treat people fairly in, far-off places. I think most libertarians and a fair amount of philosophers understand that the more centralized power, the more abuse you see further from that. The further away you get from Washington or the center of power, the less likely they are to be able to do anything to fix these problems that we're supposedly, giving them all this power over our lives to fix. So we hand people this power, we hand them the authority, we give them the guns and the ability to force us to comply, but there's no way that they can possibly know what's best for 320 million people. So who do they actually represent? Well, they represent the power base of the country. Whoever has the most money to hand them, whoever has the most influence in Washington, they get to make the rules. And they have the force, and they're going to do it. And yet, it gets abused this way all throughout history, and people still cling to their false gods. They still believe that somehow, even though it doesn't work, it will work this time if only they get their team in place.
Right.
We get Democrats in, they'll fix the problems. Then the other side thinks the Republicans will fix it.
Brad, but you'd think that would be, at some point, it's going to, that bad idea is going to break, right? You'd think at some point somebody would say, I guess this is just not how we're going to solve this, because you can say all day long, okay, I need government to give me my free medicine. But when that free medicine doesn't solve the disease, we've had a war on cancer since the 60s. And so making it free, so-called free, isn't going to make it closer to being the right method. All the right methods for healing are actually things that government healthcare policies would never even pay for, And the same thing goes for pollution. Oh, we got to get pollution. The climate change is going to kill us any minute. And then the biggest weapon against climate change, things like nuclear fusion, no, that's off the table. You're like, okay, what do you want? At some point, I know the power people I get their agenda. They're just, they're just taking advantage of people's paranoia and fear and making money off of it. But at what point can grown adults snap out of this mimetic delusion and say, wait a second, I don't know, this isn't working. Biden, he's been in power for 50 years. Is this really what we got? Maybe we just have to solve problems closer to home, right? When will this happen? Because it seems like we're going in the opposite direction in some cases,
Well, I think the more we rely on far-flung power, the less we rely on ourselves. And that's counterproductive. If we're waiting for government to solve our problems, it's never going to get solved. It's just not going to happen. Because, as you point out, they have their own self-interest in mind. And sure, their chances of staying in power are slightly greater if they help out the people. But yet, again, it's the hammer. If your only problems can be solved with a hammer, or if your only tool is a hammer, that's the only thing you're going to use to solve problems with.
Mm-hmm.
Well, force isn't a way to solve most problems. It's not going to solve our health care issues. It's not going to solve COVID. It's not going to solve most of our world problems. Are easier and better handled locally, and the closer you can bring that down to individuals, the better it's going to be.
Right.
And conversely, the farther away from the source from aid, the worse it's going to be. Washington isn't going to solve our problems. Trump isn't going to solve our problems, and Biden sure isn't going to solve our problems.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to be solved individually. And I actually think that this COVID, as you said, when will this break happen? When will people wise up and realize that they can't solve our problems? Well, I think COVID really puts this on display, that the government just is not capable of solving problems. And even if you look at the response of smaller countries, you'll see that they had an easier time of it than us. Being a country of 320 million people, all ruled from Washington, is not the best way to do it. Now, I think Trump was right in letting the governors have far more say rather than coming in with an even bigger, top-down, heavier government Washington response.
Mm-hmm.
But then we look and see at the governor's response, and we realize that even they aren't capable of running their state. They're capable maybe of making wise decisions for a narrow percentage, but they're not even capable. Like I said, Detroit's not capable of making a decision for Northern Michigan. I think we can be, I guess, grateful in a way that at least Trump wasn't more dictatorial during all of this, because it could have easily gone that way, and it would have just created even more problems. A harsher lockdown would have just hurt us more economically. We'd have more suicides, more lost businesses, more lost jobs. And so if Trump has done anything good, it's that he had a rather hands-off approach compared to what I think a guy like Biden would have done.
Mm-hmm. So what about the situation of the mail-in ballots in Michigan? Do you know anything about what the latest is with that?
Oh yeah, they're now going. They're saying that they'll be counting up to 2 weeks after Election Day, because as long as it was postmarked, or I'm not even sure how that worked, but as long as it's postmarked before Election Day, essentially, they're going to count it up to 2 weeks later.
So how easy is it to forge a postmark? I don't know anything about that. I'm just concerned about trickery.
Well, I definitely see. Well, ballot harvesting, of course, is going to go on. You just take me. I could have easily filled out ballots for everybody in my house. That's as simple as it gets. What if you don't trust your mail person? If you have a Trump sign in your yard, would you mail it from your own mailbox? I wouldn't, because what if your mail delivery person's a Democrat and they just decide to throw out anything that looks like a ballot from your address? I'm not at all a fan of this idea of mail-in voting. It's so rife for corruption.
Let me ask you, I think
it's setting up a situation where we're just going to have a fight one way or the other.
Yeah, I think it's just terrible. But do you think that this tenor of this election is going to continue for elections for the next foreseeable decade or two? Or do you think we're going to return to some kind of passivity of some sort? Not that that's a good thing either, but
I wish I could predict it. I really don't. I think that if Trump wins, he might consolidate the Republican Party around, I guess you could call it a Jacksonian view, the more populist view. And if he wins that battle, it's going to reshape the Republican Party. Hopefully, I think for the better. I think that you'll see more Democrats join in with that if he does win. And then I don't know what will happen to the Democratic Party. because they have a battle of their own going on if they come out of this big losers. And so I can see a lot of polarization coming down no matter what happens. But I do hope that Trump, in a way, is able to consolidate power, because his view of, it's not necessarily Trump that I like so much as just the idea that people want what he claims to be for. I don't know if that makes sense, but I don't trust Trump completely myself. I'm on the fence about the guy. He does some good things, some things I don't agree with. But what I love to see is the millions of people that voted for Trump's vision. In other words, what he promised. The fact that his promises appealed to so many people, I think, is a really good sign. I think that there's millions of people that have woken up that the Republican Party needs to change, that it can't be, that it needs to be conservative, that it actually needs to not like the idea of fighting endless wars. The fact that it came from a Republican also, I think, was where it had to come from, because Democrats can always play the game that they're anti-war, but it doesn't change anything, because as long as they're seen as just being the anti-war party, they can get away with being the biggest warmongers that there are. They had to have another party up against them saying, let's end these wars, before there's enough of a contrast to make any difference at all. If you take the idea that Republicans are the hardcore warmongers, then Democrats just have to be even slightly less of a warmonger, and that's okay. So I think it's a good sign that Trump was elected. I hope he gets reelected, just because I think that that's what's needed to change us away from this mentality. Because it's just too easy for Democrats to pretend to be the party of peace as long as they're just one iota more peaceful than the perception of the Republican Party as warmongers. And Trump's changing that, and I think that's for the better. But I'd still see a lot of polarization coming, because there's going to be a battle both in the Republican Party for the Jacksonian view, which is Trump's, and the Democrats are now going to be split, I believe, between progressives and your more moderate.
Yeah, it's an interesting
so where
time.
That's headed,
don't
know.
As someone that's been overseas too in different ways, what's your take on this thought that some have said that this uprising stuff looks like a color revolution method of destabilization of a regime?
Well, I definitely see something to that. I do. I think that BLM is probably being used by the powers that be. They've sunk millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars into an organization that claims to be Marxist, but yet if you read what they post, they're not. They're just a gobbledygook of weird ideas. So why would billionaire capitalists be dumping hundreds of millions of dollars into a supposedly Marxist organization? I don't see that happening. I think they're dumping that money in because they act as the shock troops and the militia for this. I don't know, for the never Trumpers, I guess, for the people that don't want it to change. They don't want the Jacksonian version of Trump to take over the Republican Party, and they don't really want to see the Democratic Party split either, because it's staying in one piece gives them more power. I wouldn't care if the Democrats split into two parties. I think that would be good, and I don't even think it would hurt if the Republicans do.
Yeah.
But
too big to fail, huh? They're too big to fail.
Yeah, but I do think that I do believe that it is a color revolution. When you follow the money, when you see how much money has been poured into these organizations, and they seem to be able to turn them on and off at will. They seem to be able to rile them up and get them moving pretty much on cue. So yeah, I would say it's a color revolution, at least.
Yeah, did you see that U-Haul showing up with the truck with all the weapons and shields and items, and they traced it back to some group called the Bailout Project or Bail Project, which I guess is funded by.
Yeah, I did. I saw that. Yeah, that was interesting. How actually the Bail Project really was something else to me. I think Kamala Harris was supposed to be involved in that, bailing out some of these agitators.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's
another one.
Look,
the other interesting story was de Blasio paying the fines of 32,000 felons in Florida.
Wow. Oh, no, that was Bloomberg, right? Yeah, Bloomberg. Uh-huh.
Yeah, Bloomberg.
Yeah, that's a mess. What a mess.
Now, see, I'm actually all for allowing felons to vote.
Me too.
I know most people probably think that's nuts, but I have studied pretty hard the recidivism rates, and there absolutely is a connection between less recidivism and voting.
We'll be back in just a moment. We'll be back in just a moment live on A Neighbor's Choice. Hold on, more in just a second.
New design, new approach, new content. NewsTalkFlorida.com. Covering cities all across Florida. Relevant information, news, business, entertainment that will not waste your time. From your laptop or your mobile device, you have easy access. Get a quick daily fix of articles, video, and audio that is relevant to your routine. Plus streaming audio from great radio stations in Florida like the Big 8 in Tampa. NewsTalkFlorida.com. All in one place, NewsTalkFlorida.com. Today's news and entertainment with a Florida slant.
David Gronowski here. Let me tell you about a man named Gabriel. Every day, Gabriel puts on his boots and drives across America to make sure our store shelves stay stocked with the food people count on. See, Gabriel served our country overseas. He knows that America stands for freedom, quality, and caring for others the way we would like to be treated. That's why when Gabriel saw food shelves getting low during the pandemic, he hit the road as a driver with Oakley Transport. In the land of the free, where no one should go hungry, we need heroes like Gabriel to help keep America fed. CDLA driving professionals. Join Oakley Transport today. Keep America fed. Visit oakleytransport.com or call them today at 1-877-8-TANKER. That's 1-877-8-TANKER.
A lawsuit is not something that anyone looks forward to. It's a stressful process. There are attorneys in Tampa Bay that keep clients well informed, creating less stress. That law firm is Catania. Personal injury law is defended with full disclosure. There is no guessing game. If it's an auto accident, medical malpractice, nursing home negligence, unsafe working conditions, or motorcycle accidents, the law firm of Catania will handle the process worry-free from start to finish. Many victims don't realize they have a claim for the loss until they talk to Catania. They only represent private individuals and treat every case as if it's going to trial. Putting families first is more than just a slogan. It's their way of practicing law. It's a commitment to you. Remember, they don't get paid if you don't get paid. So go to Catania.com. Over 28 years in practice. Catania, personal injury, auto, and motorcycle accident attorneys. Catania, putting families first.
Office Tampa. Not attorney spokeswoman.
Our monetary system is failing. Negative interest rates, growing debt, highly speculative market, and the dollar is being devalued by the Fed. Investing your wealth has never been more challenging. Who wants to earn just 1% interest annually in a savings account? There is another option, Monetary Metals. They pay interest on gold in gold, with no storage costs ever. Visit interestongold.com/David. That's interestongold.com/David. Hello, David Gronowski here. You're listening to A Neighbor's Choice. I'm here with Brad Smith, who joins us from Michigan, live, as we are reflecting on the culture today in a big picture view. So, Brad Smith, I want to just kind of land the plane here in this discussion with you. You know, it doesn't seem to make sense that this kind of groupthink would hold strong for a long time. You know, the idea that if you're doing the same thing over and over again, and you're seeing the same giant big corporations and big billionaires backing these grand social programs and social engineering things, at some point you hope and you believe that the public will wake up slowly. They'll wake up from the woke nightmare, you know?
Well, we can hope, and I do think that COVID is playing a role. I think it has to have woken some people up to the realization that they just can't make decisions for all of us. It's not a one-size-fits-all government isn't going to work. And hopefully it did wake people up. I was talking earlier about the Bloomberg there with the 32,000 people. As I was saying, I definitely studied this issue pretty hard. This was quite a while back. And recidivism goes way down. So if you look at it as a self-defense, your community will be safer if you allow them to vote. But I don't think anybody that set these laws in place ever thought that it would be abused by somebody coming in and essentially using that as a bribe to get people to vote. Are they doing something about that, or what's going on with that?
I don't know. I guess at the end of the day, it's a mixed bag there, because I think the most important thing is, you know, you shouldn't be treated as a second-class citizen, especially if it's just a nonviolent crime that you're in there for. You shouldn't have been there probably at all. But, you know, but at the same time, it is kind of weird to see billionaires kind of using it as a bribe. But, you know, who knows? You know, I think it doesn't mean that these folks will vote for Joe Biden. Yeah. Maybe they'll say, hey, Joe Biden locked me up. I'm not voting for him, so I don't care what bribe Bloomberg did, you know?
Yeah, it's definitely a mixed bag. I'm torn on it myself, because it might actually do more good, not in the voting sense, but at least for the communities. Mm-hmm. You know, if you get people involved, they're less likely to commit crime. So that's a good thing. I mean, so in a way, he's inadvertently doing a very good deed. Right. I just don't think his motivations are necessarily that great. I mean, I can't climb into his brain. I'm not a mind reader.
Well, Brad, it's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure talking to you again. I always love chopping up with you and analyzing the culture and the politics of where we're at today. So thanks for coming on the program, Brad.
Great being on. Thanks, David.
And folks, we'll continue in just a moment. And it's just we're in a unique time, and we got to stay positive. We got to stay focused. We got to stay focused on building people up. We got to stay focused on looking for innovations. We have to, because those who come after us are depending on us to do this. We can't drop the ball now, folks. We got to fight onwards with full confidence, knowing, I believe, that the vast majority of the people will come in the direction of liberty. So we got to build the path towards it and keep promoting a message of peace and nonviolence and respect for every human person, no matter who they are. Our website is aneighborschoice.com. We'll be back in just a moment with Science and You